One. And welcome, Team Elite. Welcome to the next episode of Elite Perspectives. For you that don't know me, I'm Jeremy Funderburk. I am one of the co-founders and CEO of the Elite Minds Marketing Agency. And on this show, every week, I am dedicated to bring you guys the industry elites. And boy, do I have a very, very special guest for you today. I have my buddy, Chris Chapman, who is an executive director doing annual economics intelligence reports. If you guys don't even know what that is, then grab your pen and paper, because all that means is he's smart, he knows business, and he's been able to sit down with so many top-of-the-line business owners, learn from them. He has all this information. He's been able to apply it to his life, and he's going to teach you exactly how you can do it the same. But let's take a step away from that, because not only does he do that during the day, he's done what every person in America dreams of, and that's to step out of the 9-to-5 and pursue the American dream, starting his own business. So not only is he an executive director, he's also the founder of the Next Level Minds podcast. And if you can't tell, I'm excited. We have Elite Minds with Next Level Minds, and this is just going to be a powerful combo. But wait, there's more. A little infomercial excitement for you guys. He not only has the podcast, he's also the co-founder of the Visit Travel app. And he has all the know-how around business in general, to business in the podcast world, to developing the app. And I know you guys want to learn these things. So tie your shoes tight, because otherwise you're going to be blown out of your shoes. I got my man, Chris Chapman, with me. Chris, how you doing today, brother?
Oh, I'm good, Jeremy. Thanks for asking. Just want to shout out you real quick. I've been on a few podcasts, but I've never seen that type of excitement right there. So thank you.
Sure thing, man. I can't help but be excited. I have you on the show, a true industry elite, man. And this is going to be good. I know there's going to be people that's really wanting to learn everything that you got to tell them. I got some questions lined up for you. But, man, I just know people are going to get a ton of value from this. But I want you to start off, man, by just tell us your story. Like, where do you come from? Who were you as a kid? And what led you down this entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, definitely. Well, again, Jeremy, thanks for the introduction, and really just to fully answer that question. So I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, where, a lot of people hear that and they naturally think, oh, I came from some money, just because kind of similar to Charlotte, that is more of a wealthy area in some parts. But, that's really kind of the opposite. I came from just a simple middle-class family. And, with that, we always had a roof over our head. But I realized at an early age that my family really didn't have the financial resources that a lot of my colleagues also had in Charleston. Especially, one thing that I have always loved was skateboarding and surfing, obviously being on the coast, and realized that around 11 or 12 years old, where, some of my friends were starting to get these surfboards, skateboards, go to these surf camps. And I would always ask my parents, oh, can we go here, or can we go on this vacation? And they would just kind of brush under the rug and say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do that. And I got to thinking myself of, why can't you guys do that? They're doing this. And it was, it's kind of hard to tell at an early age, the why behind the reason, So, what I did was saw what a lot of other people had. And I was like, well, for some reason, and that reason being financial resources, I can't do what some of my friends are doing. I can't do what these colleagues are doing. I need to go figure out this money thing and figure out how I can make it on my own. So, I naturally looked at a couple grocery stores to work for, but I realized I was 12 years old, and the minimum age for that's about 16. So I was like, what's a way that I can make money on my own? And I started just thinking, pen and paper, writing things down. And I was like, well, I cut my parents' grass and occasionally get 10 to 20 bucks for doing that. Let's start here. So I ended up just doing some research, seeing what popular landscaping companies were charging, and they were charging 50, 60 bucks. And I was like, you know what? I'm 12 years old. 20 bucks for me is more than enough right now. So I would just go in, knock door to door with, at the time it was Microsoft Word art. And I would just print out flyers, hand out my information door to door, and ended up just undercutting all these guys by like 50%. And me just being a kid with one lawnmower, my overhead was significantly lower than these big landscaping companies. So I ended up getting, 8 to 10 houses that I was, cutting grass for, and, making a couple $100 a week. And was able to actually, purchase some of the things that I wanted. And that's really where kind of my whole like entrepreneurial journey started, was that, true hustler's mentality of going door to door, building that business for yourself. And kind of fast forwarding from there, I was about 14, 15 years old. Again, realized some of my friends were starting to get cars. And I was like, oh, Mom, Dad, can I get a car? And they're like, that's something we may be able to help you a little bit with, but definitely can't just get you a car like all your other friends. So kind of my next step from there was, okay, well, hey, now I'm old enough to get an actual job. I ended up getting a job at Harris Teeter as a cashier. I'd cut yards on the weekend. And ultimately, that was when I really had my first big goal, because about a year and a half later, I was able to put down a good chunk of money to my first car. Luckily, my parents saved up a little bit as well. But I was able to put down about $4,000 of my own money at 15, 16 years old, which 4,000 to 5,000 at 15 to 16 is like, $40,000 when you're, in your 20s. So that's definitely where that started. And I got so much work ethic from just like having that financial goal, whether it was a surf camp, a surfboard, to a car, and actually doing the steps and procedures to get there. So fast forwarding there, I ultimately obviously was still in high school at the time. One thing that I didn't care about was grades, which you know how that works out if you don't care about grades in high school. And I definitely wanted to go to college, and not saying that you need to go to college. I know you're obviously very successful and you didn't go on the typical 4-year route, but that's something that I've always kind of wanted to do. So I went to my guidance counselor my junior year and said, I want to go to Clemson or University of South Carolina. Can I do that? And she said, yeah, well, looking at your grades, you have a 0% chance to get into any school, like not just those schools, but any school. And it's like, that's like, I'm sure you've had a lot of these as well. I'm sure your listeners have, but that was kind of the first slap in the face of like, wow, I need to start getting some things together here. So ultimately from that, scaled up, just started busting my tail in school, connecting with the right people, getting recommendation letters. Again, honestly, going door to door to different teachers, be like, can you help me out? Write me a letter. I want to go. And ultimately was able to go to College of Charleston for a year, and then got my grades up to transfer to Clemson on a pretty decent scholarship. And then ended up getting very involved with Clemson, just different entrepreneurial clubs. I was the marketing director for Students Helping Honduras. I was the head of recruitment for my fraternity. I was in the Wall Street Investment Club. And because of getting involved on the outside things of college versus just going to class, I was able to land a pretty decent gig where you and I met actually in Ballantyne, doing some IT consulting, account management work. And through that time, I realized, okay, there's got to be more than just the 8 to 5 career. So that was my first venture that I started while working there. Started the Next Level Minds podcast. After about a year of that company, I ended up taking the job with Capital Analytics as the executive director, which I'm about a year into now. And then I also co-founded the travel app about a year ago as well, with a few buddies of mine. So all that said, kind of a snapshot, but that's really how I got to where I am right now.
All right, now that's super cool. And I hope everybody listening is able to pull a lot from that. And one thing I want you guys to take out of that was just his story. And I don't want you guys to think that like, oh man, all successful entrepreneurs have this glamorous story, because that's typically never ever the case. We all start off as average people, and then we just grow from there. But the second thing I want you guys to take from his story is the driving force of a why. I want you guys to hear how there's a why behind each of his drives. When he wanted money as a kid, he wanted to get skateboards and things like that. And he had that why, and that drove him to make that first step into learning entrepreneurship and doing the lawn care and landscaping. And then, he's wanting a car, and then he has that why in mind. And that drove him to do all the extra work, to work at Harris Teeter and still do the yards and put a ridiculous amount of money in the bank, by the way, for 14, 15-year-olds. Just to challenge you guys, everyone listening to this that's 20 or above, ask yourself if you have $4,000 to $5,000 in the bank right now. Statistically speaking, 50% of Americans don't. Statistically speaking, 85% of Americans don't. So you have to ask yourself, as a kid, he was able to do these things. Now, what was the driving force behind that? And it was the why, to go from having no chance at all of going to any college to having that why, to have the figure it out blue vase mentality. If you guys don't know what blue vase mentality is, I suggest you read the book, The Go-Getter. It's absolutely incredible. But it's just that figured out mentality, whatever it takes to not only be able to get into college, but get into a high-end college. And then just all the extra opportunities that opened up to him from there. One thing my mentors told me is when the dreams are big enough, the facts don't count. So, Chris, I appreciate that. And I was able to take a lot from your story. And I hope everybody listening was able to. But going on to my next question, I want to ask you, why a podcast? And how do you come up with your content? And how do you select your guests for your podcast?
Yeah, Jeremy, that's a really good question. So, because I know, a podcast isn't just a typical route that I had a ton of people take. I know they're getting more popular, and to really answer that, again, kind of backing up to a young age, I've always loved just hearing stories of how people built their business or how people started creating their content. I remember, my parents were and they still are very extroverted people. I remember just coming home sometimes from school and, 10 people were over sometimes. And unlike most kids, I didn't just go back to my room and play Xbox. I would stand out there and I would start talking to people. Oh, what do you do? Oh, you on this business? How does that work? And I would just be 14, 15 years old and always loved hearing those stories. And when I got up to Charlotte, I realized, I do have a cool story of obviously taking that 0% chance to getting into college, doing what I had to do, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, I really want to help impact people. How can I do that on a year out of school? Obviously I don't have these big businesses to show for at this time. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to combine my passion of hearing stories, and I'm going to combine my passion of wanting to impact people into one platform, being the podcast. So that's really kind of the why behind starting that. And then content wise, to answer that question is, my podcast ranges from entrepreneurs to content creators to movers and shakers, topics around personal development, topics around technology, topics around just entrepreneurship in general. And the main question I like to ask myself when I reach out to a guest is like, do they have a story that people can resonate from? Do they have a failure that people can learn from? And if they do, then hey, come on the show. Let's do it. Let's help people out.
Nice. And that's super cool. And I'm pretty sure a lot of the guys and gals listening to this already know, like, podcasts are valuable. They're really intended for most people to bring value to the lives of the listeners. And one thing I know about Chris is that's absolutely his mission. He definitely wants to increase value on people. It's one of the reasons we connected so well. And it's super cool. It's one of those things, like you said, like we met out and about. And I was actually a general sales manager for a gym, and I was knocking doors on businesses, and I was knocking on the door of a restaurant, and he was outside that restaurant waiting on the client. And little did I know I was going to spend very minimal time in the restaurant and about 3 times as much time with Chris sitting down on the bench talking to him, complete stranger. And from that point, there was just something that said, all right, he's somebody I should probably keep in contact with. And I believe we have similar missions of wanting to bring value to people. So before he gets a chance to promote anything about his podcast, if you're enjoying his story, I want to encourage you early on right now to listen in on his podcast so you can hear all the stories of everybody else he's been able to interview. You can hear from his voice and the way he speaks. He's a master at his craft. He knows how to run a successful podcast. He's not just out here doing things like me. I take the approach of do something and hope it works for the best. Chris, he has everything planned out. He's strategic and purposeful and wanting to bring you value. So make sure you guys listen to this podcast. We're going to link to it in the description. But I want to keep moving things forward because I believe that nobody in life does it alone, for one. Everybody needs help. But I believe we all start at a certain place and then we have another place, an end goal we want to get to. But if we don't do anything different, we're always going to be in the same spot. Something needs to change. And I truly believe people only change for two reasons, either inspiration or desperation. So we heard a little bit about the desperation and the family not having all the money to start, but I want to hear the other side of the coin now. So I want to ask you, who inspires you? Who do you look up to, and why do you look up to them?
Yeah, definitely. I like what you mentioned too about the desperation and the inspiration. I think those two merged together really do create success. Um, but before I do that, I did kind of want to highlight on a lesson that I think you and I both learned when we met. If you wouldn't mind, if I could bring that up real quick.
Go for it.
So, so I think that day, actually, when I was waiting for the client outside the restaurant, this client was notorious for being at least a half hour late to every single lunch or every single happy hour I brought him to. So I'm sitting outside on this bench. I'm like super frustrated. It's like 1 p.m. I'm starving. And then I'm just kind of pissed. And then all of a sudden you roll up and you're like, hey, man. And I was like, all right, I'm going to say what's up. I'm extroverted. And ultimately, I think that goes to show that everything happens for a reason. He was late because, God or the universe or whatever you guys believe in, I think put us in that situation that I was having to wait. You were having to go to the restaurant. And then ultimately you and I had like a 30-minute conversation. And now we're sitting here today, probably because that guy was late to the restaurant, if that makes sense.
It's true.
Yeah, for sure. So I just wanted to kind of say that I think so much stuff is happening in life right now, but everything does truly happen for a reason. So
nice.
On to that answer though with inspiration. So I break this down into a few categories. I would say financially, you got to shout out to Warren Buffett on that. He, obviously he's just such a legend, and I think he's just aggressive with his strategy. He knows what it's like to save. He knows what it's like to invest. He obviously has great stocks that he invests in. So financially, he's someone that inspires me. I'd say from the whole entrepreneurial end is Gary Vee, of course, and Damon John, actually. And I know they actually did a podcast together somewhere on Gary Vee's podcast, and it was so euphoric to me because I was like, oh my God, my two favorite entrepreneurs on one podcast. So I think Gary Vee, because it's like the hustler's mentality. And then Damon John, again, still hustler's mentality, but he obviously just built FUBU from literally like a sewing closet basically in his house to this massive empire, which I think is so extraordinary. And then also just podcasters in general. I mean, there's some good podcasts out there by even some 17, 18-year-olds. That really inspires me. Young content creators, similar to yourself with all the marketing that you do, that really inspires me too. And then personally too, definitely wanted to hit this one home is my dad definitely is someone that inspires me. Not really from like a full financial standpoint, but just from a sacrificial standpoint. Because there was a time that my mom had to get surgery. She was out of work. I was like 14 or 15, so I couldn't get that full-time job yet to make money. I was a night shift stock clerk at Harris Teeter and bartended weddings on the weekend. And my parents are older parents, and he was, he's 67 now, so he was about 60 at that time, literally like sleeping 3 hours a night for 6 months straight. And I'm like, didn't understand at the time. I'm like, what is this man doing? And now I'm like older. I'm like, wow, you were doing that. So like, we didn't lose the house. So we didn't lose our cars. And so from that side, that's someone I will always look up to. From like, sacrifices are sometimes meant to be made to help support your family in desperate times.
Nice. I love that.
Yeah.
And I think one thing a lot of people overlook is the value of some of what our parents do. Like growing up, I used to think, man, like I was like a daddy's boy. Like I love my dad, but I grew up, I was like, I appreciate my dad because I'm going to learn from his mistakes. And though he made the mistakes, I also watched him, man. I was like, I would see him come home tired. I knew how hard he was working to provide for us. And back then I didn't understand that until I actually got in the working world. And I was like, man, like it takes a lot to provide. So anybody that's fortunate enough to have parents in their life that they might not even give them the best life, but they tried and did the best they could, you got to respect that. And then, I mean, guys like Gary Vee and Damon John, you got to love. And super cool. I'm glad you were able to mention them. I'm glad you were able to mention the other content creators and the podcasters out there at different levels, different ages. And I want to ask you, and this one's a little bit more of a selfish type question. But when it comes to social media, how big of a role does it play in your brand?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say it definitely plays a pretty big role. I would say from myself, I'm still very big on the Instagram space, especially for my podcast, doing, quick clips. I think that really does help build your podcast. But I'd also say too, I'm really big on LinkedIn at the moment as well, just because the organic reach that you're able to get. I mean, I only have 3,000, no, 2,000 actually followers on LinkedIn, but I made a post the other day and it was like 5,000 people viewed it. I was like, wait a second, how does that balance out? So yeah, those are two big platforms I'm big on. And Facebook too is good as well. I think it's funny though, like when I post a podcast snippet on Instagram or run an ad, it'll be, 18 to 35-year-olds liking it. And then when I post on Facebook, it's like my mom and all of her friends and my dad's friends. So it's so many different demographics in one. I love it.
Nice. That's super cool. It's funny seeing the dynamic. And I think just knowing your industry, who you're trying to reach, that really applies to where you reach on social media. One thing I always stress people is to always know where your ideal client is, where they're hanging out, how to reach them. And it's cool. Like we do a lot with roofing companies, and I was talking to one of my clients. And I'm asking like, where is your ideal client? Where does he come from? Like where are they online? And us specializing in Facebook ads, I'm like, all right, there's probably a group or there's somewhere on Facebook. Like, where is this guy? And he's like, well, we're roofers. Like, I'm expecting like these like guys, this manly man, like these are the guys that's gonna be their client. And he's like, dude, it's cougars on Instagram. I'm like, what? He was like, yeah, they're just sitting here on Instagram. They're staying home. They have a ton of money. Their husband's working. They're just scrolling on Instagram, wanting to spend money. It's like, I can use a new roof for the house. And then they book an inspection. I was like, dude, I never would have suspected that. But it's like you're talking about. I was in different platforms,
always just
different
knowing your client.
Yeah, you have to know your client. So your podcast, who's your podcast? Just throwing an extra question here for you. Who's your podcast geared towards?
Yeah, so anywhere from 18 to 30, either aspiring entrepreneurs or current entrepreneurs. And especially with some recent episodes, it's been geared towards the recent grad of, okay, I have this job, but I want more than just kind of like I felt 2 years ago. I have this job, but I definitely want more than that. So
Nice. Cool. So if you guys fit that demographic, definitely tune into his podcast. If you guys don't fit that demographic, but you're like, hey, I'm above 30, but I want more out of life too, you're not excluded. Tune in, learn something. But let me make sure I stay on track with my questions. Now, I don't spend 3 hours just trying to pull as much information from you as possible. But what are some of the challenges that come when you're starting a podcast and even with starting the app? What are some of the challenges that'll come up?
Man, I'm laughing just because there's so many. Like I had 2 challenges this morning already. So I mean, you can attest to this too. With starting any business or brand, it's challenge after challenge after challenge.
Yeah.
So, but you just gotta laugh it off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So kind of breaking down podcast wise first, I'd say that the biggest challenge is if you're not technically savvy with like the audio side or, investing in a mic or how that works, you got to kind of ask yourself, if you have the money, like, can I outsource this? How much can I do this for? Is there like a third party? Because I don't think if I'm not audio savvy. So I was like, you know what? I'm not going to spend the time and learn for 3 months on audio when I could be doing episodes for 3 months. So I did my research outsourced. So that was a big challenge of like having to look for somebody to do the outsourcing at like a cost that I can afford. And again, that just goes back to like innovative thinking. I started thinking, I was like, wait a second, one of my best friends, Matt Droz in Nashville, he's an audio engineer. I'm going to call him and see if he can do this. And he charges me like a really good rate just because it's kind of like the homie discount, quote unquote. So again, I think that's going back to being innovative. Another challenge though is definitely having enough content, because I'm sure you and all your listeners, I'm sure it's every day is not the same. So it's like, okay, Tuesday, I'm going to record an episode so I can produce it on Wednesday. But it's like, oh crap, like I have to go run this errand, and then the washer broke. And then, so I think it's having enough content, which is definitely something I still struggle with. I mean, I went from having 10 episodes on the backlog to now only having 3. So that's a big challenge that I think every podcaster, no matter if you're, well, if you're Gary Vee, you have like a whole team, but no matter if you're up here or like down here, I think that's a big challenge. And I think another big one too that I still struggle with is keeping the podcast aligned to like the brand that you want to have. So I know you're, next level thinking, next level minds is, your mindset's your greatest weapon for the battle of success. So my podcasts are centered around proper mindset, but sometimes I've known with guests, I kind of get off topic from that a little bit unintentionally, which doesn't fully support the brand. So that's a really hard challenge. I'd say for the app though, kind of switching gears a little bit is, with the app. So again, this is the Visit Travel app. We're launching our beta version fairly soon. So feel free to reach out to me if you want to test out a travel app. Obviously, once COVID-19 leaves, we're very, very, very close to being fully developed with it. But I would say a big struggle with this is, and I thought this same way too, whenever my business partner and I thought of this idea, what did we immediately do? Where we're like, okay, we can't really code. So then we started looking into agencies to build it for us. Well, those were charging 20, 30, 40, 50, 200 grand at some points in the States. And I don't know about you, but I didn't have 20 grand liquid cash, 2 months out of school. So a big challenge was like, how are we going to do this? And ultimately it went to our roots. We're like, you know what, let's bring on a technical co-founder and give him equity in the company on milestone payments, where each version he produces, he can get more equity for the more work he puts in. And so we just went to LinkedIn, went to Instagram, basically battling, DMing people, Instagram messaging people, and ultimately like found a fantastic technical co-founder who had like the same vision we did to get out of the 9 to 5 with this app. So a big challenge is like the actual development, but if you can play your cards right and ultimately figure out like good operating agreements that still give them equity payments, based on obviously once you start getting revenue, then I think you can actually do it. I mean, we were able to get this done for under $1,000, where originally we thought it was going to be like 50 grand and we were going to have to take out loans, but $1,000 is way better than 50,000 if you ask me. So
Absolutely. And it's crazy. It's like I was talking about earlier, that figured out mentality, whatever it takes. I think that's what it is, because I think so many people, they'll get the 20 to 50 grand in their mind, and then they're like, oh, I don't have the money. There's no way I can come up with that. And they just quit. And Chris is showing you guys, like, don't quit. Like I told you guys earlier, when the dream's big enough, the facts don't count. When there's a will, there's a way. And Chris has constantly proved that when he sets his mind to something, he's going to figure it out. That's probably why he has the Next Level Minds podcast, which he said, for you guys that don't know, Elite Minds, our slogan is next level thinking. And he's a guy that has that next level mind. He has that next level thinking. And that's why he's able to achieve these next level results. So if you guys aren't really taking deep note into Chris and his story and his thought process, most importantly, learn his thought process. And once you guys are actually able to implement that into your life, whether you're trying to create a podcast or an app or whatever it is, it's the same success principles. Just have your why in front of you, and then just have that figured out mentality. Do whatever it takes. And Chris is giving you example after example after example. I mean, who would think the guy with, there's probably no chance you can go to any college, is going to go to college, get a job as an executive director, create a podcast, and then an app that should have been $50,000 and figure out how to do it for $1,000. That is true entrepreneurship at its finest. But last thing I want to ask you is, what advice would you give to anyone that want to get into the journey of becoming an entrepreneur, that's trying to live the entrepreneur lifestyle? What advice do you have for those guys?
Yeah, definitely. And I was actually thinking of some good advice when I started talking about the app and the podcast and just getting from that point A to point B point. Something that I really want to touch on is when you have that business idea or you're first starting out in business, or even for those people in career, because being in a career your whole life is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, not for me. So when you're at that starting point, have that big dream and have that big goal, but also don't try to boil the ocean all at once. Boil that pot of water first. So when we first started the app, my business co-founder and I, we were literally on a whiteboard. I mean, this thing looked like we drank 15 cups of coffee and we're drawing out like this massive idea. We're like, this is amazing. And then we got on the phone with a guy who was just kind of offering his services for free for just some consulting on like how we should do it. And he was like, you guys are trying to boil the ocean right now. I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, you guys are trying to come up with basically like the next Instagram. He's like, you realize Instagram when they first started, it was just take a photo, post, that's it. You realize Facebook was just a college kind of friendly website. He's like, you guys need to find out your pot of water to boil before you boil the ocean. So I think that's just some good practical advice. If you want to start a podcast, just get a mic, figure out audio engineering or outsource it, press record and go. And then your vision and your drive will continue to build that brand up. So that's a big one. And I definitely say too, like you can attest to this, and why we're probably sitting down is like surround yourself with good people. I think on mine, it's like good family members. You can't obviously choose your family, but if they're negative, spend a limited amount of time with them because they're going to kill your dreams. And if they start killing your dreams, you're going to start thinking that way too. So definitely surround yourself with good friends. And another one too is surround yourself, and I get really passionate about this one, surround yourself with a significant other that supports you building a business, because I get so many calls from people like, man, how do you have time from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. some nights to build your podcast or build your app? You know, my girlfriend or my boyfriend wants me to eat. I'm like, well, you have to get them to support your vision and your goal. If they don't, then honestly, this is like going to rip a Band-Aid off. But like, if they can't support your vision after numerous conversations, then get rid of them. Like, because I'm telling you, you're going to have so much resentment towards that person if 5 years down the road you see all your other friends who you surround yourself with building things and you're like, I could have been there if it wasn't for this person. So definitely like do that. Make sure you surround yourself. Shout out to my girlfriend Jacqueline. She is supporting me. She's literally out here reading a book while I'm on this podcast. So, you know, taking time out of my day doing that. And I guess another huge piece, sorry, I'm kind of going off on these, just definitely got some good advice for everyone. So another one too is like, surround yourself and don't be afraid to ask for help when needed. So I feel like a lot of people put successful entrepreneurs, and I'm not talking guys like you and I who have these kind of smaller companies that were in the building days. I'm talking like the guys that have 5, 10, 15-year-old companies. I feel like entry-level entrepreneurs put them on a pedestal when it's like, hey, a lot of entrepreneurs have the mentality that they don't forget what it's like and they don't forget where they came from. So don't be afraid to have that initial message on LinkedIn. Don't spam them, but say, hey, I see you did this. I'm doing this. How can I learn from you? Can I get 5 minutes of your time? I've done that so much. Like the app would not be where it is right now, and the podcast would not be where it is, and I would not be where I am with my career if I didn't reach out to people at an early stage in my life. Even I've messaged somebody who's had 20 years of experience and said, hey, I see you've done this with your app. You've built like 4 companies. Here's what I'm doing. Do you have 5 minutes? And he's like, oh yeah, I'll call you on the way home. Like, thanks for connecting and reaching out. And we ended up talking for 30 minutes and I literally had like 4 pages of notes that's like completely pivoted. So big thing out there is like, don't be afraid to connect with people. The worst that's going to happen is they're going to be like, no. And if that happens, the best response you can say is, hey, I appreciate you getting back to me. I understand you're probably too busy. How about I reach out in 6 months when I have more of a scaled business? And then they're going to be like, all right, kid, let's see what you can do. And then those 6 months, it's your time to shine and your time to build. So
Beautiful advice. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, association, that's one of those things that's super huge for me and my wife. You know, it was the game changer for both of us. It's just surrounding yourself with those other like-minded people. And man, I cannot stress the importance of the significant other being in support.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you guys have a spouse that's not the most supportive, you have to, I recommend you guys, I'm not saying divorce your spouse. Like me and Chris are not saying divorce your wife. Like if you're married,
Yeah.
like we're not saying that. So I don't want marriages ending and everybody coming yelling at us.
Yeah, we just get sued by divorce attorneys. Or,
Full disclaimer, we're not saying divorce your wife. What I
no, no.
recommend is just start reading relationship books. And like I just read one start to finish the past 2 days. Just finished it last night. It's called For Men Only. And it gives you the insight into how the woman's mind works. Now, say read books like that and Love and Respect and the 5 Love Languages, and really learn the inner workings of a woman. And when you're able to give her the things that she desires, and you know the root to her desires, and you're able to fulfill those things, and she's always filled up, then when you let her know in the best ways, and these books teach you how to communicate with her, like, hey, I have to do this. It's for us. I'm doing this for you and our family. Every woman wants security. It's innately built into them. And when they know that you're taking this time away from the dinner and from family time to do something that's going to secure her and her future, then she gradually starts to see your perspective and she'll come along with you. So if your significant other isn't completely on board right now, you're already married, then it's fine. Like there's hope. Granted, I also listened
Yeah,
to
for
Grant
sure.
Cardone earlier this morning. He was talking about his first wife, and they weren't married a full year. He's like, she wasn't supportive. She was never getting on board. I divorced her. But then he threw up the disclaimer. That doesn't mean go just divorce your wife. So,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think like you just want to say a disclaimer as well. And obviously we're not relational experts, but for anybody out there that may not have that full support, I think it comes down to two things. Like first, to you mentioned a book, but I would also suggest Crucial Conversations. It's a book my older sister gave me for graduation from college. Really good book. And second, I think it's finding that compromise of like, for example, I had a podcast for my podcast before this. I had a workout this morning and I have a conference call in about an hour from now. And so obviously, where's the window to hang out with my girlfriend? Well, I compromise. I'm like, okay, at 5 p.m., let's go order dinner. Let's go watch a movie. Let's go do a walk tomorrow. Let's do an online church. And then, I'll have my phone notifications off and it's just strictly that time with her. So right now we're all in on the podcast. When I'm hanging out with her, all in with her. So I think that's some good advice too.
yeah, definitely. I fully agree. Me and my wife, and you guys will learn a lot of successful relationships. They're like that. You have that compromise. Like, all right, I'm about to take time away here, but at this point, it's all you. You get my full focus, like all my attention. And I've been busy. Like me and Chris, like we have a lot going on. So we really have to be intentional about finding those times. Like my wife, she's gotten a lot of time. I've even got to the point where now we almost have a date night almost every single night. And it's not this big extravagant thing. It's just like, hey, let's just cuddle up and watch a movie together. I mean,
Yeah.
you guys did that once with your wife, like a week, and that 1 hour pure her time would mean the world to her for the whole week. So, but moving on, we're getting to my favorite part of the show, and that's our game, Elite Instincts. And Chris, this is where the way the game works, I'm going to say a word, and then you have to reply with the first word, ideally one word, sometimes more than one word, but ideally the first word that comes to mind after I'll say the word, all right?
Cool.
All right, so to start, podcast,
Next Level Minds.
success,
Work ethic.
investment,
Stock market.
sales,
Marketing.
believer,
God.
wealth,
Strategy.
vision,
Dream.
innovation,
Entrepreneurship.
development,
Time.
outrageous,
Crazy.
Ignorance.
Bliss.
Chris Chapman.
Next level.
There you go. The next level mind himself. You guys heard it. That was super cool. And what's great is I prepared these words beforehand. I didn't even know how much he was going to talk about, innovation and development and all these things. So it's super cool how it tied in like that. But nothing left to do now but just to open up the floor to you, man. I want you to tell these people, everything you got going on, what they should look out for, what projects you're working on, and it's all yours, man. Let them know.
Yeah, for sure. And again, Jeremy, thank you so much for having me on the show. I've watched obviously your first few episodes. Really love how you structure it. It's definitely like a relaxed feeling too. I don't feel bad taking a sip of water. You kind of move around, which is nice. But just kind of on my end, first off, if anybody wants to connect with me, definitely want to help people out there. So Instagram is just Chris Chap, and my LinkedIn is just Chris Chapman. Facebook as well, and then I think what I have open on my plate is Next Level Minds is released every other Monday. And then the third Monday of the month, I do a Motivation Monday. Definitely tune into that. It's just topics on gratitude, perspective, entrepreneurship, about 10-minute clips to get your week started. And then I'd say like with the app, we're actually, again, launching our beta version soon. We still have some room on our list. So if you guys, obviously COVID's not going to be here forever. If you guys got any travel planned for later in the summer, you guys love traveling, or you guys just love doing new apps, shoot an email over to teamvisit@visittravelapp.com and just say beta, and we'll add your email to the list, where you'll have an opportunity just to test out the app in a couple months once we fully release it out there. And other than that, I think just obviously keeping building on the back end and ready to just obviously keep adding value and trying to impact people daily.
Awesome. There you guys go. Make sure you check out his podcast. The gratitude thing, I can tell you guys, is absolutely huge, because as you're going through your journey, you're going through the struggles, having that gratitude is going to be what keeps you on track. And it's going to take all your major problems, and it's going to turn those mountains, and it's going to turn them into molehills when you have that gratitude. So definitely tune into this gratitude portion when all these travel bans and everything are up. Make sure you check out his app. Reach out to him about that. And I'm going to make sure he's linked to any platform that you're on social, so that way you can follow him. And other than that, we hope you guys have gained a ton of value from this episode. I know I have. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode.